Okay, we are live. Welcome everyone to the Doc Bookshop, Doc Live. We're so excited to have our guest A'LeLia Bundles with us, and she's in company with Terry Allen.
Yes,
And
A'LeLia Bundles with us.
and I would love to be on screen with them, but we're having some technical difficulties. So I'm just going to ask the questions, and Miss A'LeLia Bundles she's going to answer the questions, and Terry at the end will share about the upcoming event that's happening this Sunday in Dallas. So let's just go ahead and get started with our conversation. So Miss A'LeLia Bundles, we're so excited to finally meet you and see you and be in conversation with you. Um, I don't know if you remember, but when you came out with your first book about Madam C.J. Walker, you called us and told us to make sure we use your book because there was another book. I was like, no, that's not it. My book is it. And ever since then, we have been using your book. Okay, it's like a favorite, and it sells very well. So we're
That's
excited
great.
about the.
I think I actually might have. Did I visit the bookshop? I feel like I did when I was in. I had a visit to Dallas, but maybe I might have come by there.
I don't know. No, I will remember if I met you in person. I have not
Okay.
met you in person. Yeah. So anyway, what we're going to do is real quickly. I just want you to just share with people about your family legacy. I mean, you're the great is a great
Yeah.
granddaughter
So,
of Madam C.J. Walker. You have like all the historical documents and stuff. So just kind of share the richness of your family legacy.
well, first, thank you so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to being in Dallas. And I thank Dr. Terry Allen for arranging the events which he will talk about. But yes, Madam C.J. Walker is my great great grandmother. I am her biographer, as well as her great great granddaughter. And my background, my professional background is as a journalist. So I am a storyteller who worked at NBC and ABC for 30 years, but really was preparing in many ways to write these 5 books that I've written about Madam Walker. And this latest book, Joy Goddess, A'LeLia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance, is about her daughter and her daughter's life in New York, especially in New York from 1913 to 1931.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And also, let's just kind of delve right into the book because A'LeLia Walker, she was such a fabulous person.
Yes.
She had wealth, glamour. She was a part of the arts world. She's a benefactor to the Harlem Renaissance. So just kind of tell us about how did you gather her story, and how long did it take you to write it?
So it took a long time. In some ways we could say I've been working on these books almost all my life. I first really discovered things that belonged to Madam Walker and A'LeLia Walker when I was a toddler. So that's 70 years ago. When I
Oh
would
wow.
visit my grandparents' apartment and I opened up a dresser drawer that had things that had belonged to them, an ostrich feather fan and mother of pearl opera glasses and these little miniature mummy charms that I later learned A'LeLia Walker had bought in Egypt in 1922. The silverware that we used every day had Madam Walker's monogram. And my mother was vice president of the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. So I knew
Wow.
something about this family connection, but it wasn't the center of my life. My parents really wanted me to follow my own path, my own dreams. And I love to write. I've thought of myself as a writer from elementary school. And I began to think about them. In senior year in high school, I wrote a report about A'LeLia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance. When I was in graduate school at Columbia in journalism in the fall of 1975, I wrote my first paper about Madam Walker. So that's how many years I've been working on this. On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker came out in 2001. That was the first really major comprehensive biography of Madam Walker. I'd written a young adult book in 1991, and that may be the one that I called you about. That was part of the Chelsea House Black Americans of Achievement series. But I knew that both of these women needed their own story. Madam Walker obviously is the more well-known, famous, hair care entrepreneur who created jobs for thousands of Black women. But A'LeLia Walker is interesting in her own right, and I wanted to kind of let her take center stage with this new book.
Wonderful, wonderful. And as you kind of organized her life, um, there's there's a lot of chapters. There's 42 chapters, so that just tells you the depth of A'LeLia Walker. I mean, so kind of as you was going through going through her story, what kind of stood out for you the most? I mean, I'm going to just I'm going to try to read these some of these chapters for our audience here. Um, you have one called Black Cinderella,
Mhm.
and then you have another one called the Guest List.
Mhm.
Then Two Loves. I wonder what that's about. And then a funeral and a wedding. I mean, you have a lot of stuff broken down, and so I'm just trying to figure out which of these chapters really stood out for you.
Well, so you're right. There are 42 chapters. They are not long chapters. In each chapter, as you know, with a bookstore, you people organize their stories differently. You want the reader experience to be a good one. And my editors and I worked out the book is probably half as long as it was as my original manuscript was, because
Wow.
we wanted it to move and we wanted to have just the essential pieces of her life. There are lots of other things that I could have written about, interesting people from the 1920s who I wanted other people to know about, but I couldn't really pull them all the way through as characters all the way through the book. But those chapters that you mentioned, so Black Cinderella is a chapter introducing my grandmother, May. And May had very long braids, and Madam Walker's main product was Madam Walker's wonderful hair grower. And May was adopted by A'LeLia Walker. Their families knew each other, and there's a longer story, more complicated story about how that came to happen. But when May was adopted, the Madam Walker and A'LeLia Walker promised her family that she would be educated. She ended up going to Spelman, was an honor student, and later became president of the company. So it is a kind of a Cinderella story, but then there's some twists and turns. The guest list is about the opening party at Villa Lawaro, Madam Walker's mansion in Irvington, New York. And of course, the backstory of Madam Walker is that she was born in Delta, Louisiana in 1867, the first child in her family born free on the same plantation where her parents and older siblings had been enslaved. But in by the she founded her company in 1906. By 1916, she was wealthy and had a very successful business. And her daughter persuaded her to move to New York, where A'LeLia Walker had moved in 1913. And in 1917, she started building this beautiful mansion. And so that party, the guest list is about the party that she had in August of 1918. Okay, so I'm not hearing anybody.
What's going on?
Yeah, I saw you, then I saw her, and now I only see me.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I wonder, but for a while I was just on
Tell us
the.
something about it.
Well,
Yeah, I got
one
it.
of the
Do me a favor while I'm speaking.
so we'll just
Tell
continue
me
on
to burn
continue with the
out.
conversation, hoping that it's reaching other folks. But I'm really looking forward to talking with folks about the book, and to let them know. I find that when I wrote On Her Own Ground, a lot of people sort of thought they knew something about Madam Walker, but as we know, we're not taught history in school. And sometimes we have to teach ourselves history, which is what I really had to do. But if we don't understand the ancestors and we don't understand what the grandparents went through, we are sometimes not able to interpret what's happening to us today. And one of the things that I learned in my research and writing about Madam Walker is that, as I was saying, she was first child in her family born free, but by the time she died in 1919, she was a millionaire. And she had been mentored by the women of her church. She was still a poor washerwoman at 38 years old in St. Louis. And it was the more educated women of St. Paul AME Church who began to give her a vision of herself as something other than an illiterate washerwoman. But she learned those lessons. And when she founded her company, she turned around and did the same kind of mentoring to other women. So that by the time she had her first convention, national convention of her sales agents in 1917, more than 200 Black women from all over the country came to Philadelphia. And she talked to them about being in business, but she also talked to them about community service and about philanthropy. And for me, that's really the takeaway of Madam Walker's life, that she didn't just make $1 million, but she helped people create generational wealth. She helped women become economically independent. So I'm looking forward to sharing that story with them. And then also to talk about her daughter, how her daughter, it's very hard to be the child of an icon and a pioneer. And A'LeLia Walker was navigating her own way. And I think she tried to find a happy medium that both honored her mother and honored the business, but also that was authentic to herself. And both of them were philanthropists, both loved the arts, both loved music. And I think A'LeLia Walker sort of found her happiness as a person who supported her friends who were actors, writers, musicians, and artists.
All right. Can you hear me?
I can. Waiting for your
Tell us
question.
about the power and the who's who that came. The Dark Tower. I want you to explain what the Dark Tower meant.
Sure.
And the who's who that came through there.
So both Madam Walker and A'LeLia Walker loved to entertain, and they both had wide circles of friends. Madam Walker sort of more on the political business end. A'LeLia Walker knew all of those people, but her friends were the cultural people. And so when A'LeLia Walker moved to Harlem in 1913, her mother had made the headquarters in Indianapolis for the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. A'LeLia Walker was managing their Pittsburgh office, but Harlem, she had sales in Harlem, and he could see that those sales in 1913 were eclipsing the sales in Pittsburgh. So she persuaded her mother that they needed to be in New York City, as Harlem was becoming the Black cultural and political mecca. So they bought 2 townhouses. They were combined into one remodeled, beautiful facade by Vertner Tandy, one of the founders of Alpha Phi Alpha, who also was one of the first licensed Black architects in New York. Right. And so at that townhouse, both of them entertained. They knew whenever they had an event, it was great food. They knew the top musicians. There was live music, interesting people, always interesting people. So they entertained in that townhouse on 136th Street. They also entertained in Madam Walker's mansion in Irvington, New York. But that townhouse on 136th Street really was A'LeLia's. And she had started to have parties. In some ways, sometimes she rented it out for wedding receptions, fraternity and sorority parties. Sometimes she would let Black civic organizations have meetings. So people knew that space. And it also was the venue for the Walker Beauty Salon. But in the 1920s, as some of the young writers like Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen and Wally Thurman, Zora Neale Hurston were starting to get recognition, A'LeLia Walker wanted to do something that would help promote their careers. So she remodeled a room in that townhouse that she called the Dark Tower. It was named after a poem that Countee Cullen had written from the Dark Tower, and it was also the title of a column that he wrote in Opportunity magazine. So the idea was to give the young writers a place where they could hang out. And in some ways, the business model was a little tricky because those young writers were supposed to sell subscriptions to the wealthy patrons, and they didn't quite keep up their end of the bargain, but they were still welcome. And then the other parts of the house, A'Lelia Walker would host other parties and rent the space out. But it became, Terry, a place where if you were coming from Chicago or Atlanta or Baltimore visiting friends in Harlem, they wanted to take you to the Dark Tower. Your visit to Harlem was not complete until you had gone to a party there. You could go back and tell your friends, "Oh, I saw Paul Robeson at this party," or "I met some interesting people." And then A'Lelia Walker herself was quite charismatic. As one society columnist said, she didn't just walk into a room, she swept into a room, and people were drawn to her like bees to flowers. So she did have that amazing charisma that just drew people to her.
I also want you to touch on the fact about because I lived in New York, and remember when I told you the first thing I did once I got my apartment in Manhattan is I went over to Villa Laval. I had to see it, and at the time it was under construction, going through a ownership change. Tell me what was Villa Laval? What was the intent? I mean, it's an amazing building, and I
Mm.
like what has been done now. It's a think tank for women in business. Matches my sister's CEO program. What was the intent when she built that? Because it was amazing.
Yeah,
Share that a
so
little bit with
yeah,
you.
so when Madam Walker again, the Walker Company was headquartered in Indianapolis, and that's where the headquarters stayed. But Madam Walker moved her personal residence to New York in 1916, and even though she was still traveling, she was staying at the townhouse on 136th Street in Harlem near Lenox Avenue. But she decided she wanted her own home. And so she had Vertner Tandy design this mansion in Irvington, New York, in Westchester County, just outside of New York City. And she really built it, she said, because she wanted to show young Black girls and boys what could happen, that she had been born the child of enslaved people, and yet she had created a business that was creating wealth for thousands of other women. And this essentially was the fruits of her labor, a house that had been built by money from Black customers. And she wanted them to be able to be proud of it. Sometimes some people criticize her and say, "Why are you, building this big mansion?" But I think that it's a national historic landmark. It's a National Trust for Historic Preservation national treasure. And it is an enduring, tangible symbol of the progress that African Americans made in a half century after slavery.
For me, the draw for me, and I work with the men. When you're going to be in Dallas, we're talking about history makers. Your great great grandmother, yourself, and your grandmother were history makers. They made history. I shared with a group of people that the income coming out of Madam C.J. Walker's company exceeded the average income of the white male during that time by
Hmm.
almost 2,000%. But her customers were Black. And so I tried to impress upon them, and I can't wait for you to share some of that when you come to Dallas, because I saw the beautiful pictures you had of the few months that Miss Walker spent in Egypt, and the pictures she took. And I love that part where she actually ordered tents in front of the pyramids so she could have lunch. That's power.
Right.
So
Yeah, I know,
my
and I think that's kind of, the tour for the tourists.
quick,
They probably have those
they
tents up, and then you get to, pay a little extra
use
to be able to hang out.
that.
Okay, so I think the internet connection is a little wobbly because I didn't hear your
But
question.
also, but it shows the power. Okay, but I think some of this though, and I want you to share this with the show that you're going to do in the slideshow you're going to do in Dallas, but and where we match the history makers with our history makers like your family. But some of that shows the power of our economic power. We were able to do a $12 billion hit to Target, but it's only based on spending. We quit spending. So I think that the money that your great great grandmother generated was based on our ability to have the money to be focused on one thing. So what is the greatest power you can learn from? And also, I do want you to address why it's called Joy Goddess, but let's
Yes.
say that to people in let's save that for the live audience in Dallas. But can you address the power? Because you Villa Lawar had the who's who of African American history come through those doors. You know,
Right.
my fraternity member of my fraternity built some of the things there. But tell me some of the people who walked through there and how that impacted the Harlem Renaissance, how that impacted our history. Because right now, I don't think our people know our history, especially those in the next generation. So tell me some of that history that Villa Lawar helped
Yeah.
expose
Right.
with Miss
The,
Walker.
the opening party was in honor of Emmett Scott. Emmett Scott had worked at Tuskegee with Booker T. Washington, and he's always described as his secretary, but today we would call that chief of staff. And by 1917, he was working at the United States War Department during World War I, when 300,000 Black men went to France to fight on behalf of America, and he was the secretary for Negro Affairs, and the opening party honored him. At that party, there were, AME bishops, James Weldon Johnson's brother, uh, John E. Nail, who was an important realtor, a number of really well-known, influential African Americans, and whites who were sympathetic to the cause were there. During A'Lelia Walker's lifetime, a number of famous musicians like Alberta Hunter came to Villa Lawaro. So it was a place that people felt a great deal of pride in. And I think you are right that many of us don't know our history, and we're in a moment where I would say during my lifetime, history was not taught well in most schools. And then we've had a moment where we were getting Black History Month, Women's History Month, Latino History Month, and where school systems felt that the children needed to learn a wide range of history. Different from my experience in school in the 1950s and 1960s, where my textbook said literally slaves were contented, and used that word, because they were clothed and fed. But then we had this flowering of scholarship and Black studies and women's studies, and then the books that you see behind me. When I first started doing my research for my books, there were like maybe a dozen biographies on that included women in the Harlem Renaissance. Now I have a whole wall. These are all of these books in this room are Harlem Renaissance or Harlem Renaissance adjacent. So I taught myself history. And we are now at the point where we see, AP African American Studies is being criticized, where school systems are telling teachers they cannot talk about race, they cannot teach about Black people, where university professors are nervous about what they're saying. And this is problematic. Obviously, we need to fight against that, but we have tools. History is on TikTok. History is on Instagram. History is on Brian Stevenson's website. It is not hidden if we want to find it. History is in the Doc bookstore. So we can teach ourselves, and as I say, I'm annoyed. I'm annoyed that books are being banned. But you know what? We've never really been able to depend on school systems to teach our history. We have to do it ourselves. And the one of the ways to start, because I've done all this family history, but I love encouraging other people to do their family history, is to as your grandkids, your great grandkids, every time they talk to, a grandparent on FaceTime or on the phone, encourage that child to ask grandma, how did you learn how to ride a bicycle? What did you eat on Sunday? Get all of those little stories so that they know they have a history. Then once you have those sort of basics, that child can write a report. That child can learn how to go to newspapers.com and find a story about what grandma's hometown was like. We have to preserve our history, and we complain about other people trying to erase our history, but if we're not the front lines, we're erasing our history.
Yeah, and I concur that with you. One of the quotes that I write a column. Big Mama said, I've been sending you copies of it for the past
Yes.
3 weeks. I've been focusing on our history, and one of the things I thought is most important is that once upon a time when we were colored, we
Mhm.
won, and we've forgotten how to be colored. And when I read your books, I love On Our Own Ground. As a matter of fact, I use your books as a litmus test for all the people who come to me as a PR person and wants me to put their book out there. And I said, well, let me let you get a copy of On Our Home Ground so you know what a book looks like. Because right now, what
Thank
I hear
you.
from you is therapy, not a book. But Big Mama's column that I put out, the one I put out the line that I did in Texas Metro News this week was dance with the one who burned you. Big Mama used
Right.
to say that all the time. And it turns out that when I'm reading the kind of loyalty and support that both Walkers had and that you have, I see it's honoring the legacy of us being able to survive by depending on ourselves. And my biggest famous quote comes from James Baldwin, when he says, "Our history is not our past or our present. It's not our past or our future. It's our present. We are our
Mhm.
history. Only we
Right.
tell our stories presently. The people that come after us will know what happened before, but we'll be able to create that history on a daily basis." I think, and you could share your opinion, but I think what Madam Walker did, both Madam Walkers did, was create a current living history, and
Mhm.
they did it, and they were able to create it because you're talking about um, all of the authors coming through there, the support of the Harlem Renaissance in your book. On our own ground, you talked about having washerwomen turning into salespeople, making thousands of dollars they've never made before. Can you expand on the fact that what they did was creating a current history that we're able to talk about and how we could use it today?
Mhm. So, yes, I think that Madam Walker, and A'Lelia Walker were both very cognizant of what they were doing and the impact it had on others. Something that is key for me is their executive team, who they surrounded themselves with. So Madam Walker hired a great attorney. She hired a woman who was the manager of her factory. They had a marketing person, an advertising person. So they knew that they had to create a narrative. And we know that, from PR, that you have to have a story, an origin story. A story is what draws people in, and they were very aware of what they were doing, so that when Madam Walker would travel, she traveled all the time. When she would travel from town to town, she'd take out an ad in the paper or a little article in the paper. Madam Walker's gonna be in Dallas next week speaking at so and so church. And so then the crowd would come, because this is before television, before most people were going to movies. She was the entertainment,
Absolutely.
and she had something that was like PowerPoint. She was technologically ahead of the curve. It was something called a stereopticon, and it was glass slides that were shown on the wall with a projector. And she had pictures of Black colleges and schools and famous Black people and books, and she would do a lecture telling people essentially the progress of the race. So she would generate excitement. And then after that big presentation, she would invite a dozen or so women to meet her in the basement or in another room, and she would demonstrate her Walker hair care system. And while she was doing that, she would see Who asked the best questions? Who did the other women gravitate towards? And she would make that person her her lead sales agent, and then she would move on to the next town, and that person would be the one who would make the order for all the other women who were selling the products. So I'm saying that to say she was creating her present and her future. She knew that she would needed to pick the right people, and she needed to pick the people who could represent her well. And that storytelling is critical to that. And and I think sometimes we think about what am I passing on? What is my legacy to someone? And sometimes, the grandchildren are not all that interested. Even your children are not all that interested in what you have to say. Oh, mama's talking again. But you and I know that big mama had something to say. Sometimes it takes a little while for that
Oh,
to sink in. But, figure out how to I mean, I think we as the elders, at least I'm certainly probably now in the category of the elders, we have to figure out how to make it interesting to young people.
yeah,
Um,
I agree with you. We gotta create what's in it for me. That's my favorite station I'm tuning into, WIFM. What's in it for me? And I think that, and you and I talked about this. Let me share with the viewers that you and I are NABJ family members. We're members of NABJ, which is the National Association of Black Journalists. You and I did a workshop before COVID, right there in the
mhm,
city, DC, that you're in, and we talked about the power of storytelling and how important it is. One of the stories I wrote after our workshop was the children of George Floyd need to talk to the children of Emmett Till because you got the same problem.
mhm.
And so what I learned from uh, your ancestors, both walkers, that they learned how to put people in the room that could be
Yes.
game changers that would talk to history. And so I know that you're going to talk a lot about that in Dallas. There's going to be a lot there. But what I also learned is that we as a culture, and please share your thoughts on it. I think networking is our greatest power. What do you think?
Yeah, and especially right now, one of the things that has been one of the gifts for me during the last few months as I've been traveling around, talking about my new book and meeting with a wide range of people, whether it's at a library or a college alumni group or the links in Miami with whom I just spoke, and then of course coming to Dallas, is that I am seeing that we know we need to be talking to each other. We need to be fortifying ourselves especially during this period of time when so much of what is important to us is under threat. And one thing I know from studying history is that when things are at their worst, that's often when we create organizations like the NAACP, like the National Association of Colored Women. Um, we think sometimes of the Harlem Renaissance as, oh, that's the Cotton Club and rent parties, and people were just dancing and drinking and having a good time. But it was people coming together and networking. It was this magnet of Harlem in the media capital of the world, in the publishing capital of the world, in the theater capital, where that brought all of these creative young people together, and that also attracted Black business people and Black political leaders. But while we were vibing off each other in that small community, there's a lot of stuff going on outside. We are responding to, in some ways, the racism of the Woodrow Wilson administration and the segregation of federal offices when he became president. We are responding to the fact that Black soldiers, after they had been in France during World War I, fighting on behalf of the United States, they came back expecting to be treated as full citizens, but they came back to the Red Summer of 1919 with more than 30 massacres, lynchings throughout the United States in major
Right,
cities.
right.
We are responding to the massacre in Tulsa. We are responding to the segregation that is going on and the economic disparity. So that's when we must come together and fortify ourselves. And it can feel very dark right now, but I get these little pockets, these little things where I see organizations fortifying, where I can go to, fortunately, museums. There are a number of museums now where Black artists are on display. There's always music. And even sometimes these tickets are really expensive, and so everybody cannot go. But there are things that we can find on YouTube. There are things that we can find in church. There are things that we can find in community centers where we need to use culture and art to fortify ourselves.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I do want to say, we're coming to a close. It's the end of the hour. So I do want to say to you guys, we want to thank the Dark Bookshop, and go to the Dark Bookshop and get your books, because Miss Bundles is going to sign them, and we don't want to rush on the day of that she arrives, but we want to have a flow. Make sure you get your books, not just the drawing artists. Get all the books I got, on our own ground, and all the other books that are there. And we're just going to close with a thank you for the bookstore for hosting this. Thank you, Miss Bongos, my friend, for calling me. I mean, I know this started out to be a Zoom call for my cooks, and now we turned it into a full-fledged arrival in Texas. So we've come from a online call to actual live presence. And so do me a favor, kind of tease the people with what you're going to be doing and talking about. Don't give them everything, but tell them what
Well,
else we're going to talk
I
about while
need,
you're here. And
I
of
need,
course, my event is also going to.
yeah, I would love it if you would just sort of give the dates and times and the specifics, because I don't want to mess that part up, and then I can fill in.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Terry. It's going to be
I know you've been
Sunday.
traveling all over the country. I see your schedule. Sunday at 3 o'clock at the Hall of State, which is our historical landmark. That's where we wanted to be, in a historical place. And it's at the Fair Park, which is in the center of our neighborhood. And it's a historical place as well. And we're having a bunch of history makers to come in the room that we're not going to be honoring them directly, but we're going to force them to talk to each other. It's like I said before, the children of George Floyd don't talk to the children of Emmett Till. And Miss Bundles is going to help us talk about it. A'LeLia is
We
going
are
to help us
looking
tell your
forward to that.
story and get in touch with each other and show you how both the walk out. So Sunday on the 23rd, 3 o'clock, you're going to walk in. You're breaking up, so let me finish this. You're going to walk in and you're going to see, and she's going to share some additional stories and some visuals that are going to show you how powerful we are as history makers, as she shares her family history and shows that what the Walkers went through, all of them, and Miss Bundles, is a solution to what we're going through now. It's not different, it's just amplified. And we have a way to get it done. So I was going to ask Miss Bundles to tease a little bit about what we else we're going to see when she arrives in Dallas on the 23rd, Sunday. And we're also going to have a special private reception too, as well.
As you say, I'm really looking forward to sharing some of these stories about the Walker women. But the thing that is a gift for me is that their story is the story of African Americans. That so many people have a connection. They're a business that they know somebody who was a Walker agent. But I also use their story to tell the story of our ancestors, of the journey that we have made from the 1800s through. A'LeLia Walker lived into the 1930s, but I see these parallels between what was going on historically and what's going on now. And so I think we have much to learn from the ancestors, from the grandparents. And I hope that I'll be able to share those stories with people on Sunday.
And we look so forward to meeting you.
Yes, and I'm extremely excited because,
Can you hear me?
yeah, we're looking forward to the
Can you all
engagement.
hear me now?
I've seen what you
We
did
can,
at my
yes.
favorite place.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen what you did at the Sunberg, and that Sunberg event was amazing. How you tied the past, the present, and the future together. I'm looking forward to that, and I've seen I'm excited about the slideshow that we're going to be showing when you get there, and that particular one slideshow that shows that whole historical impact of both walkers and I can't wait. We won't tell them today, but we'll tell them how the name the Joy Goddess came about.
Oh,
So thank you
great.
for being on the call, and thank
All
you. And
right.
we're looking forward to seeing you.
And so is the doc shop going to take us off? If we're
Yes,
going to.
I am. And thank you so much for your time, Ms. Bundles. We appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Thank you, Terry, for stepping in and doing what you do. Great conversation. We look forward to this Sunday, and I'll see you then. Y'all have a wonderful.
Great. Thank you very
Take care,
much.
and thanks, and thank you, Miss Bundle. See you. Looking forward to seeing you this weekend. Talk to you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.